Yeah, I guess what I'd like to talk about today is that something that's made my acceptance of my diagnosis extraordinarily different, especially identifying symptoms. And it was early childhood trauma. And on this particular occasion, I'd um, been in a social setting, playing a game. I was only 4.5 years old. I'd already been traumatised on 2 or 3 occasions already. And on this particular occasion, it's the thought process that has taken me a long time to be able to recognise as being symptomatic even way back then. And to keep it really simple, my older brother made a statement that triggered the rivalry between us, and I wanted to, uh, get that status back. My father used to love playing mind games, and my older brother was nicknamed King. I don't think I really knew what a king was. I may have had some idea, but I coveted that title. Um, I formulated this plan in my mind, and I can see now that due to the game that we were playing, I was already in a heightened state of awareness. I was already detached. And as this plan formulated in my mind, I can see now that I began to slip into and ended up in a state of derealisation. I thought, and it's quite common for a child of that age to have egomania and to be egocentric. And but the thing about it is, as this plan formulated, the grandiosity was there already, firmly established. It was megalomaniacal in nature. And, I thought that once I'd been validated as the most viable offspring in that group, then I'd be ushered into the world of the adults, whom I perceived as gods at the time, and I'd be welcomed as an equal, and it would never be disputed again that, like I mentioned, I was the most viable offspring there was. And the sense of triumphalism, it was glorious in nature. I guess this was the first time that I connected with inner divinity, and it was all in my head. I don't remember, being, or having these feelings coursing through my physical realm. It was all just in my imagination. And, I followed through with my plan. We'd been splashing one another with water. A directive was issued to stop splashing. My older brother had directed everyone's attention upon me by saying, "Let's get Dave." And I was getting so overwhelmed with water that I had to turn my back to them and I couldn't splash them back. So in my mind, I'd rationalised that when that directive was issued to stop splashing water by an adult, that I was excluded from that. So after a period of time, I began to splash the kids on the bank who had milled about an adult at the edge of the water. An older cousin turned around, and he was the oldest in that peer group, turned around and said, "Hey, we got told to stop splashing." And that's when I unleashed my master stroke. I thought that this statement would see me heralded. And I said, "You kids were splashing, I wasn't." To which he went bright red in the face and launched himself at me and proceeded to assault me. I won't go into any more content as it could be triggering for others. But my actions and behaviour, my attitude and behaviour, he'd personalised and went through a process of depersonalisation of his own. So it was the other end of the spectrum in that depersonalisation disorder. What confounded this trauma was the attitude and behaviour of my parents. I remember my father afterwards, whilst I was still in shock, I can recall him saying, "He'll learn." And that just devastated me even more. And my mother, whom I was mimicking her attitude and behaviour because I thought I'd mastered the game, so to speak. That was her attitude and behaviour. She thought she was a master game player herself, and she shunned me. There's a lot more to it than that, but I guess that's why I see a therapist. But that megalomaniacal grandiosity that I experienced in the state of derealisation, it's taken me a long time to be able to open up about that due to the distrust of others, and I'd repressed it so deeply within my subconscious. So I'm still very much like that, in the sense that I go through the motions in my own imagination, where I can envision situations in my own imagination, where I have some sort of control, and that, I will be celebrated and applauded due to, I've mentioned it before, the munificence. Somewhere in the state of that, the mayhem of that, in the thought process, I remember feeling as though, I will reciprocate, or I will give off some of my love and affection only if, I am established as the most viable, the king. So yeah, so I still go through the motions of, being celebrated and applauded in my own imagination. It's a frenzy. It took me years to identify that. I was in a frenzied state of excitement or ecstasy. And like I mentioned, it was all just in my head. So for a long time I disputed with the psychiatrist that, it was a post-traumatic stress disorder in my life, and that once I'd resolved that, I'd be cured, basically. And, I can see now that, whether it's schizoaffective or schizophrenia, that, I still have those thought processes which are indicative of mental illness, and I'm heading towards 50 now, and still got the same sort of creativity as that of that excitable young child. So it's humbling to admit that, but there's a lot more to it than that. Sometimes I get glimpses into it. I won't go into it now, because, as you may have told, as you can tell, it's still pretty jumbled up. I haven't sought the guidance of a trained professional in regards to these matters, but I'm starting to get a sense now that I can get some closure in regards to that. And so I go from the top of the heap, so to speak, to being an outcast and ostracized. And at times, when I'm feeling dejected, lonely, disillusioned and depressed, part of me is still waiting for someone to come and rescue me, because in the aftermath of that trauma, it was actually the perpetrator's mother that eventually come up and put her arm around me and brought me back into the family fold. And she gave me a sugary drink, whether it was cordial or soft drink, I don't really recall. But, I'm still addicted to Coca-Cola, and, it's a way of self-soothing, Coca-Cola and nicotine. But, I've spent, 13 minutes talking about something that took place in the span of 2 to 3 minutes. So, that was a revelation for me in recovery, that you could have an experience in, the space of 5 minutes and spend half an hour to an hour, debriefing from that. So I'm hesitant to get emotionally involved with anyone today, and that may give you a little insight into as to why. That's only just the beginning, without trying to big note my whole. In regards to trauma, my whole life was about trauma. And so I either want to dance with the elite, or I think I'm a parasite, and trying to find some middle ground is a challenge for me on a daily basis. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe, and any sort of comments, insight and awareness, please feel free to post in the comments. I'd love to hear other people's experiences and thoughts. Perhaps I'm meant to start a blog on Reddit or something. I don't really know. I'm a lazy individual, and I make 3 or 4 recordings a day, but I only post 1 or 2 to YouTube. So thanks for listening. Bye.